Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Again, this is Huge Downs, and we're on to the looks like the 3 o'clock hour now. We've got Rob Walker, who is the CEO of Surveys and Forecasts, coming on to talk about the marketing research for Maritime insights that drive business success, hosted by Surveys and Forecasts. Rob Walker, and before we dive into that, just a reminder again: karaoke at 6 o'clock this evening. Thank you very much. On to you, Rob.
Thank you, Huge. Pleasure to be here. Carlene, do you have anything that you would like to start off with, or should I just get underway?
Go right into it, Mr. Walker.
Thank you. Do we have some slides that I can see or that you can advance for me? I'm not sure I see them at the moment, but there we go. Okay, let's go on to the first slide after this, please. This is a discussion about marketing research in maritime. And I'll explain a little bit more completely about what that means and how it could potentially improve your business and your business operations in just a second. A little bit about myself. I'm the CEO of Surveys and Forecasts. We are a marketing insights company. We provide strategic guidance to companies in maritime, and that includes customer satisfaction, it includes analytics, and a whole host of other supported activities to support that overall function and mission. Prior to starting my company back in 1994, I held a variety of different research director positions at consumer goods companies, responsible for all survey and syndicated research in those companies. And then in 1994, decided to launch a consulting business focused on a variety of individual sector type of businesses, which includes customer satisfaction and analytics. So with that, let's move forward. I have a few things I'd like to say up front. Please advance the slides. Thank you. To set the stage for what I'd like to talk about today, from my perspective, and admittedly somewhat of an outsider to maritime, the maritime industry is continuing a process of disruption and innovation and upheaval, and that's producing a certain level of consolidation and a certain merging of technologies and other fundamentals in the business, which is causing, in some respects, products to become perhaps in some respects less differentiated than they might have been 20 or 30 years ago. So we are at, I think, an interesting crossroads in terms of the maritime industry. We expect that companies that obviously have good financials, strong balance sheets, good operations will continue to do well. But it's going to become more important as time progresses for companies to learn how to differentiate and talk about their products and services in a way that is relevant and tangible to their end customer. And so that's really what I want us to start to talk about today. And in particular, companies that have a strong learning culture, that are open to testing, that are open to information about their customers, their customer needs, are open to testing and evaluating their ideas in the open market, if you will, among their customers. They stand the best chance of learning from that information and fortifying their position in the marketplace, because they're going to have intelligence that their competitors are not going to have. So that's what I would like to try to focus on a little bit in the hour that we have ahead. Next slide, please. I'm in the research business, and clearly, obviously, I have a strong belief that research can be a key differentiator between success and failure in organizations. There are three fundamental reasons why that's the case. Number one, if you're going to do research and you're going to do it in any kind of consistent and structured way, let's say, you're going to move from opinion-based to being fact-based. So you're operating from information that you're getting not from your opinions or maybe from your peer group, but you're listening to the customer and you're using that information to help form factual information about the market. The second thing is you're moving away from subjective observation, anecdotal observation, to objective measurement. And the third is you're doing something that's measurable and repeatable. So again, if you are doing something that is highly technical, highly regulated, very structured, you're responding to specific requirements from your clients, clearly, research has a role to play, but maybe less so. But in markets where the customer has a strong voice in how products and services are shaped and delivered, this is where a research function, an insights function, or the role of insights can play a significant role. So we're going to talk about how to think about, plan, and execute research in your maritime organization to provide you with real insights about what your customers think. A lot of companies think that this is not frivolous, but maybe a bit of a luxury, something that you don't necessarily need to do or might not think you have time to do, but that's really not true. Without that kind of insight, you really are at a disadvantage, not only to your competitors, but also to your customers, because your customers are asking for something and you might not be listening to what those needs really are. Next slide, please. So today I want to introduce a few things. I'll call them fundamentals about marketing and marketing-driven organizations. I call them the 3 Ts, and I'll get to that in just a minute. I'd like to identify some research tools, some really solid basic research tools that you can use to help your organization. Some of these you may already have licenses to within your organization and are just not using them as fully or as productively as you might want. How to assess your customers and what their prospects and what their needs are in terms of feedback. Describe some ways that can happen. And then last, I want you to start to think about how you can embed the research process into your thinking about your business operations and integrate it more fully into your thinking and your planning. Next slide, please. So marketing research is also sometimes called insights, and it's the process of listening to customers and using that knowledge to understand their needs. In a nutshell, that's really what it's all about. Every company should be focused on 2 primary activities. We've heard a lot about technology and disruption and innovation. Certainly that's a core function of any organization, but the other part of every organization is marketing. Marketing is that process of meeting customer needs and trying to fulfill those customer needs by designing and creating solutions for customers that meet their needs, specifically in terms of their need state. So in marketing and research, next slide, please, there are 3 core activities that you need to think about. I call them, again, the 3 Ts. Targeting, in other words, who do you want to talk to? Testing, and tracking. Each of these pieces on this cycle feeds the other, and they can happen in any sequence. So there's no magic formula here in terms of process or sequence, but each one supports the other, number one. Number 2, each one feeds your business operations at different points in the process. So you can do testing at any point in the process, from new product development to an improvement or an enhancement. There's no rule that says you have to do each one of these stages at a particular point in time. But you should be, on a consistent basis, thinking about how each of these different components fits into your overall business operations. Next slide, please. So let's go through them one at a time. Targeting involves identifying your target audience, the best way to reach your target. And one of the things that probably you don't think about maybe as much as perhaps you should, how do you communicate your story? What do you tell your customer, your prospect? What is the message that you're trying to convey or to communicate to your target? Testing, in a nutshell, is just that. It's testing. It involves the testing of either ideas or messages or products or features. And they can be basic in nature, or they can be highly complicated and highly structured. And I can talk a little bit later about methodologies for that, including the discrete choice, diff max, trade-off type designs. And then the third piece, the 3rd T, is tracking. So once we've identified our target, once we've done our testing and evaluation, let's say we've launched a product or a service, we want to find out how it's doing in the market. We want to identify who our target is up front, and then we want to monitor among that target how well we are performing against that set of objectives that we established for ourselves against that original target. So tracking is an important part of this because it's part of that feedback loop. Next slide, please. So let's take the first of these buckets, if you will, in the process. Next slide. By targeting, we mean who is your audience, right? So this could be any number of criteria that you want to use to identify who your target audience is. And again, it's going to vary significantly by the type of maritime organization that you are. That could vary in terms of job function, roles, and responsibilities, but it also can include softer characteristics such as life stage or attitudes. If you know your client or your particular target is a particular type of buyer, those are important. We often think that in technology or in industrial products categories, maritime, that it's always a rational sell. That's not always the case. How do you reach your target? You can either use a variety of traditional media sources. You can also use all of the things that are on this slide, such as search or personal selling, product demonstration, thought leadership, social media, public relations. All of these feed into the targeting process because it helps support your overall story in terms of what you want to communicate. And the last is the nature of the message itself. Is it a problem solution message? Is it a financial message? Is it an emotional message? It could be any combination or one of those three with support from the others. But the idea here is not just that the target exists, but that you communicate the message properly to the target so that the target understands what you're trying to convey and that resonates on a level other than perhaps just the rational. One of the points I would make also, and this is in no way to start a war between sales and marketing, but marketing is not necessarily selling. Marketing focuses on matching your customer needs with your offering. Selling is, I have a product, here it is, do you like it or do you not? Marketing is the process of fine-tuning that relationship. So selling needs marketing and marketing needs sales, but marketing is the concept of fulfilling against the set of needs that you've already identified from your targeting and from your testing. So it starts with some basic assumptions about who your customer is, what their needs really are, and trying to match those against what you have to offer. So it's not always what I said up front, not always a rational sell. Next slide, please. Targeting also involves understanding the conversion path that the customer takes prior to making a purchase decision. If you think about your own purchasing decisions and your own thinking and behavior in other product categories, it's not always oh, I see an ad, I understand what the product is, and I'm going to go out and get it. It's often a multi-touch process that involves time and effort and energy and repeated exposure. Research will help you define who your target is and refine what you probably heard before is a catchphrase, your unique selling proposition or your USP. That is what makes you different or unique or stand out from your competition, and what problem are you solving? Research also helps you to understand, as I mentioned before, the customer journey. What are the steps along the customer journey? Identify those touch points before conversion, whatever you define conversion to be. If it's actually a purchase, or is it to visit a website or to click on a link or to download a white paper? But what are all the steps along the way that are required for you to get the conversion that you are seeking? Research also helps to identify some of the key end benefits that your customers are looking for. What are the selling points, and what are the ways that you might use some of those to help you size your market? We tend to think of specifications in maritime and in industrial categories, but I want you to think a little bit differently in terms of not just specifications, but what are the end benefits that are being sought by the customer. Next slide, please. One of the other things that you might want to think about in the area of targeting is personalization and customization. We all get targeted emails and other forms of communication. Some of them come to us and we pay close attention to what they're saying to us because it says, Dear Rob or Dear Huge or whoever. I react differently to a message like that than I would to a message that says, Dear colleague or Dear friend or something along those lines. So personalization and customization they're more common in e-commerce categories, but clearly they can be used to improve satisfaction, boost retention, boost conversion. Maritime operates in the same way as any other industry, in the sense that we're talking to other human beings. We're not talking to robots. We are human. We're all in a community of maritime experts and executives together. So remember in your communication that personalization is essential just to crack the door open and to at least have people pay attention to what you're saying. One of the things you should ask yourself in your marketing and media campaigns is, can you address your customers' problems in a personalized or customized way? What are the markets or your customers' needs? I've mentioned that before. Is your solution better than your competition? And if so, how? And are those differences relevant or not? What are the things that you ought to be stressing? If fuel efficiency is a price of entry, well, what beyond fuel efficiency is going to get a customer's attention, et cetera, et cetera. So think about those hooks that are beyond the product specifications that get people to pay attention to what you have to say. It's really important. People respond to emotional messages as much as rational messages. The other thing is, what are the pain points? It's not so much that you're offering something that's a positive, but are you addressing a very difficult or real problem for the customer? What are those pain points? And again, as I've said all along, try to think about ways to humanize your messaging. We often think that we're in a business that, because it's maritime, it's technical, and obviously the audience I'm speaking today is a highly educated, highly technical audience, but we're still emotional creatures, and we still respond to that sort of tonality, if you will, or that kind of messaging in the messages that we receive. Next slide, please. So one of the things in targeting is, who do you target first? One of the strategies that has emerged in some of the academic work that I've seen is that you would be wise to target your most loyal customers if you're trying to evaluate or test something new, to test it among your most loyal and dedicated customers, because they're the ones that are the most familiar with your product or your product category, number one. And then number two, loyal customers are still unlikely to be buying their entire category needs from just one supplier, i.e. you. They may be buying from 3 or 4. So the question is, how do you displace or you shove some of that volume over in your direction? And the best target to go after in that environment are your most loyal customers. In fact, there's actually recent research was just released about 2 weeks ago that showed that by focusing on your loyal customers exclusively for additional product consumption, whatever the category is, and again, maritime is no exception here, you can, if you're focused on that loyal segment, you can produce somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 10x ROI on your additional spend when you do that. So there's always additional volume that can come outside of your existing customer base, but your existing customer base is always a great place to start. You'll get the most bang for your buck, and you'll get the highest ROI if you go after that one core target. One of the things that we'll be talking about tomorrow when we talk about disruption is upstarts. And keep an eye out for new entries into a category. They can nibble off small chunks of your business and take your pricing floor out from under you if they solve a need that you have not been paying attention to. So in your targeting, in addition to focusing on your core customer, keep an eye out for disruptors. Often at the low end of the market, they'll operate on lower margin and higher volume, but they may be solving a need that you have not been paying attention to. So keep an eye out for disruptors. The whole point of solving a customer's need, whatever that need is to minimize friction, right? You're trying to solve a problem for that end customer. And upstarts / innovators / disruptors often find a shortcut to get to that solution faster than an established business. Next slide, please. If you're in a business where you can't necessarily target effectively, one of the fallback ways that you can go after a particular target is to go after what is called reach, to reach as many people as you possibly can and generate as much awareness as you can. You have to start somewhere. If you remember maybe from your business school days or from other marketing courses you might have taken in the past, there's an old model: awareness, interest, desire, and action. Everything starts with awareness before you get interest and before you get desire and before you get action. So target broadly if you have to at first, and then narrow your target from there. Over the longer term, you'll find that you have a core group of loyal customers. Those will distill out over time, and you can continue to utilize them for additional marketing and targeting purposes. So you have to start somewhere. That's really the name of the game. You have to start somewhere. And over time, you'll find out who those core customers are through feedback and through other methods that we'll talk about actually next is our next slide. So Please advance to the next slide, and we're going to go on to the next bucket, which is of the 3 T's. Now we're going to talk a little bit about testing. So next slide after that, please. So testing might seem a little obvious. It's how we learn what works and what doesn't work. And if you remember those of you who remember back to, I don't know, the mid-90s or so, when total quality management kicked in and continuous improvement became much more common, and Edwards Deming's ideas became much more dominant in business processes, we should always be in a continuous testing mode, right? Continuous improvement is supported by continuous testing. We do that to find our winning messages. We do that to find our winning products, and we do that to find our winning formulations and processes. Your strategy, as you test, your strategy will adapt. You know, you have a strategy now, you'll have a strategy tomorrow. The strategy that you have today may be slightly modified by what you learned through testing. That's just the way the process works. The important thing is that you test. If you don't test, then it's my opinion versus yours, and we'll flip a coin. But if you're testing, then you're in a position of having facts, having advice, and having guidance from your end customer, or from whoever your constituent happens to be. And you tend to then minimize losses from R&D investment, or opportunity loss, or loss of first mover advantage, or other kinds of losses that you might have stumbled into had you not gotten the information you needed up front. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier, consider testing among your most loyal customers, if you do have them, or your best case prospects. One of the ways that you can do that is you can look at your most loyal or your best case prospects and find other non-customers who are similar in their profile to your most loyal customers, because they're probably the next concentric circle out in terms of their potential buying potential. Think about ways to profile your customers when you're doing your testing, so you can test among your core audience, and then you can test among those that are close nearby in terms of the key profile characteristics or indicators that make a difference in your category. One of the ways that we can do this, next slide please, one of the ways that we can do this is to test what we would call ideas or concepts or conceptual or thematic ideas, things of that nature. In Maritime, that may be a little bit more difficult. And when I mentioned up front, there were more sophisticated ways that we could do testing. There are ways to portray an idea, and ways that we can either add or subtract features and benefits, and then find out what the net impact is on interest. And those are more sophisticated trade-off designs, conjoint designs, and things of that nature. But the point is that you test ideas in their conceptual stage, perhaps early, not even prototype stage, but we're talking pen and ink on paper or on a screen, so that you get reaction to what the idea is, how people might react to some solution that you're proposing, and then get some sense of demand, estimate some sort of demand or demand function off of that data. Then you can begin to model and do demand estimation. You can begin to forecast. You can begin to think about all kinds of other things. But you have to start with some feedback from whoever your clients are, whoever your customers are, and begin to dimensionalize what that starts to look like. One of the things, again, I mentioned earlier, and I want to reemphasize it in the context of testing, is paying special attention to your message. Yes, we have technical specifications we have to communicate to our customer, but pay attention to not just the product itself, but also persuasive words, images, sound, all of the creative elements that go into the way that an idea could be portrayed to a customer. Ask yourself, how does your message resonate with a prospect? Is any sort of emotional message, or is there any sort of resonance on an emotional level with what you're talking about? Those are the kinds of things that really hook a customer, a client, is not only the factual piece, but the left brain, the emotional part that really causes us to sit up and go, oh, wow, that was very impactful. We've found in other categories, and a whole host of research studies, meta-analyses and such have been done to look across a variety of variables to find out which things are most impactful. And we look at the types of media vehicles that we use, the actual assets, whether it's print or digital or search or whatever. And we have found that while all of those things are very important, almost somewhere between 50 and as high as 80% of the persuasiveness of your message is due to the creative portion alone. So I'm advising you to hunt where the ducks are, which is not only communicate what the functional benefits are of the product or service that you're offering, but talk to the things that are perhaps less front and center, a little bit more subliminal, if you will. And I'm not trying to say, subliminal messages per se. I'm saying there's a whole range of other things that can communicate the benefit of your product or service without words or facts or figures or tables. And my little, cute comment at the bottom, if you get the creative right, the teacher will give you a B. So that's actually a pretty good starting point for any message that you've got. Next slide, please. There are many different survey research approaches and platforms that are out there to gather insight into what your customers or your consumers are looking for. Paper surveys, web-based surveys, text-based surveys, some of those you're familiar with. Some of those you may have in-house right now. I imagine that most of the people in this audience have a SurveyMonkey account or a Qualtrics account. You can get one for free. You can do, I think, somewhere between 100 and 500 respondents in survey research projects per project at no cost or very low cost. So those are tools that are easy to learn, get you up to speed very quickly, help you test ideas and feedback. I would recommend any of those highly. If you're not comfortable, obviously you can hire an expert, but you have probably at least one or two in the quiver right now in your organization. Most of these tools have really good starter features. They allow you to show ideas, concepts, et cetera, et cetera. So check them out. They're definitely worth understanding more completely. Next slide, please. I mentioned earlier that one of the reasons we test is because we are moving from subjective to objective. We're moving from anecdotal to fact-based. We're moving from opinions to measurement. So when you're doing any form of research, you ought to be including a set of evaluative measures, which are things like scaled measures, 5-point scales, 10-point scales, and asking them, if you're doing an ongoing evaluation program within your organization, to do it on a consistent basis. So these are the kinds of questions that, for example, in some of my industrial products work, we would ask of a potential buyer of a product or service, likelihood of buying, open-ended likes and dislikes, which are often very rich and valuable for people to provide thoughts and ideas, areas for improvement. That's often where a lot of good refinement happens in some of those comments. How unique it is, how believable it is. And again, uniqueness and believability might be the questions that you would ask for something that is not in the market right now and is not an existing product in an existing category. It might be something entirely new. Value perceptions, whether it's a problem solution product or service, and is it superior, better than other products or services that are in the market right now? So the point of all of this isn't so much the questions themselves as it is to be fact-based and to be objective and to be rigorous in how you go about getting feedback from customers. Next slide, please. Well, this slide was obviously written pre-COVID, but to the extent that you can visit with clients and get feedback from clients directly and not assume, go out and get that feedback directly from them. Ongoing discussions, ongoing feedback, panels, group discussions are great ways to get feedback from customers and clients. Use every source that you can to get the kind of feedback that you need to make business decisions. You're always well served by going out and trying to get feedback from other people besides what you're thinking in between your ears. Find out what's working, find out what's not working, and ways to improve. So if you can, follow competitors on social media or seek out similar companies to fuel ideas for testing. Our company has a list of decision makers who are willing to participate in survey research. There are other companies that may have similar lists of decision makers. That's a great way to evaluate and get ideas for a new product or service or a configuration that you're considering. So think about that as another source of information to help you guide your decision making. And the last piece on testing is try to, over time, create benchmarks, if you can, for future reference. So if you tested an idea 18 months ago and you're testing it again, but with a new improved feature, a new feature set, or some other benefit that you didn't include last time, you'll have that in your hip pocket to say, have you moved the needle? That's an essential piece of part of the overall research, testing, and evaluation process. So, okay, so let's move on to the last of the T's, please. Next slide, and then you can quickly advance to the slide after this. It's called tracking. So we've talked about targeting and we've talked about testing. Now we want to talk about tracking. So once you've identified your target and you've tested and refined your product or your message, you need to then monitor how you're doing. And this assumes that we've launched a product or we've introduced an idea or a product or service into the market. And it's essential that you then get feedback on a regular basis, usually through some form of survey research or feedback mechanism, but some way to get an assessment of how you're doing in the marketplace. And famous last words, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it, right? So all of what I've been talking about today has been in encouraging you to codify and invest in an objective research program so you can get that kind of fact-based feedback that you need. Of course, you want to track the hard measures, sales, units, dollars, but remember that those are measures that are at the tail end of the transaction, right? All of the things that led up to the sale, all of the things that led up to the transaction are being ignored if you're only looking at units or you're only looking at dollars. So the question is, what's working well? SKU is stock keeping unit. What SKUs are working well, which ones are not, and why? What is it that's going on in the marketplace that is not performing well? Or if it is performing well, why is that performing well versus something else? So what's the trend, either in satisfaction or in some other hard measures such as reordering? Is it a customer service problem? Is it a maintenance problem? Is it a what problem? That's part of what we do when we do tracking. Strive for regular reporting to assess your progress. So again, I'm presenting this under the context of a new product launch or something that has been introduced into the marketplace. You're probably doing a lot of this work right now for existing products and services, but strive for regular reporting to assess your progress and make refinements along the way as necessary. If you have a CRM system, try to trigger post-transaction follow-ups. If you've sold X units to a key client, key customer, you know, Salesforce, HubSpot, whatever you're using has a very nice survey deployment feature. Send out surveys to your customers, find out if they were happy with the transaction. If they were, great. If they weren't, follow that up and then include that as an augment to your ongoing customer satisfaction work if you're doing it. So that's, again, if you're just doing the CRM piece, that's just a snapshot of one transaction. The question that you need to ask yourself is, what's the trend? Next slide, please. One of the things that I do quite a bit of in terms of survey research work is customer satisfaction work. You might have heard the term Net Promoter Score, or NPS. This is a standard way of collecting information about how happy your customers are with you relative to some established benchmarks that are out there in the public domain. Net Promoter Score is great for many categories. It is not always a perfect question for some categories, and there's always a decision that you need to make whether that's the appropriate measure for your particular business, but it is one that's well known and one that is widely used. Build a monitoring system around your Net Promoter Score data. Dashboards, drivers, predictors, visualizations, those are all great tools to help bring that information alive and then push that data throughout your organization so everybody is aware of how you're doing in terms of customer satisfaction. Just like in a production environment, set confidence intervals around your satisfaction score after you've done it for at least a a 6 month to a year period where you're doing it on a regular basis, let's say weekly or monthly. Set some confidence bands, 90%, 85% around a trending mean. And then if there are things that are out of control or out of bounds, try to find out what's going on in terms of that abnormality or outlier, and then drill in and try to find out if that is a one-off or if that's a process problem. Another thing that you can do in terms of tracking is consider using an advisory panel of your best customers. I know a lot of customers are very happy to be part of an advisory panel. You can sometimes have some issues if the customers are competitors, or if there are issues that you don't want one customer to see versus the other. But there's nothing preventing you from building a virtual panel and using virtual tools to collect data from them individually. It's a great mechanism to give you regular feedback. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is an example of an industrial products parts supplier that I did some work for not too long ago. We had an issue with late deliveries in October of that particular year. We drilled into what was going on there, and there were some issues with several key routes in terms of the supplier's supply chain. Those were addressed, and we figured that out fairly quickly. But again, this is just a quick example of the sorts of things that you can do to try to diagnose and resolve service problems, service outages, supply chain issues, et cetera, et cetera. But think about this in the context of any number of other measures for any number of verticals or industries that you might be involved with, and it can be very powerful, especially if you have adequate base sizes to drill in, or if the customers are large enough that any one customer is significant in terms of its volume impact. Next slide, please. So tracking is really all about listening, keeping your ear close to the ground, and I would encourage you to gather feedback like a sponge. Don't assume that you know. You know a lot. I'm not trying to diminish anything in terms of what you do know, but don't assume that you know everything, because customers are unique. Each customer is a little bit different. Each one has its own set of needs, its own set of issues. So keep your ear close to the ground, get that feedback from each customer, and review each customer's ratings or data. If you're getting individual customer level information, look at each customer through an objective lens and see how it can enhance your business. Sometimes people make some pointed comments, so try not to have a thin skin when it comes to feedback, and look at it constructively so that it can help your business and help support your overall operations. Gather ideas from distributors, resellers, competitors, even if you can, if you're not violating, collusion, antitrust, whatever. Any source of information over time is a great source of information from a tracking perspective, but the primary focus should always be on the end customer. Next slide, please. So those are the 3 T's that I wanted to cover today: tracking, testing, and targeting. And again, they can occur in any order, but they all are in support of your primary business operations. So to wrap up, next slide, please. There we go. Number 1, well-designed research and good judgment go a long way to help your business thrive and grow. Good judgment obviously gets you a very long way, but good research gets you even further. As your business becomes more successful and or more sophisticated, the need for feedback is going to increase. It's definitely going to grow. You can't, as your business becomes larger and you become more separated from the day-to-day operations of that business, you're going to need to have mechanisms in place to make sure that you're getting feedback from your most important customers. As your needs grow, consider working with somebody who has some expertise in this area. Certainly will throw my hat in the ring, but there are a lot of really great people out there that can help you identify what problem areas there are that might exist, help you refine your overall plan, including your feedback plan, help you think through your marketing strategy. And I think there's maybe a little bit of a presumption that you don't need to do research. We can figure out all of these problems internally, and to a certain extent, you guys and gals are all smart experts in the shipping technology space. But if all of those problems were that easy to solve, you would have probably figured out what was wrong by now. So in some cases, you're going to need to go outside and try to get feedback from your customers and really try to understand what the issues are. I think you will find that it's money well spent. So with that, I will believe I can turn it back to you, Carlene. That is my presentation for today. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. That really gives us a wonderful overview of the capability and the role of survey research in marketing in both the general environment, industrial environment, but specifically to the maritime industry.
Correct.
And some of the points that I thought were really important was that you reiterated is that by conducting survey research, you're moving away from opinion and conjecture, and you're getting to that point where you can actually measure. And I remember it was about 8 or 10 years ago, Will Jenkins, who was then the president of Sea River Maritime, which is the shipping arm for ExxonMobil.
Right.
He made that statement, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. And that was ExxonMobil 10 years ago. We have varying levels of sophistication in terms of marketing approaches within the maritime industry. One of the other points that you raised, which I think could really be helpful with the utilization of sophisticated research and marketing is a complaint that Frank Coles made earlier today when he was speaking on digitalization, is that so often products are being launched into the maritime industry to solve problems that don't exist, or there is a myriad of products to solve one problem. So I think it's important to be attuned to the market and to really, if there is a clear need, then yes, address it, but don't create a need to match a product.
Yes.
And that's where market research comes in handy. The other point that I wanted to explore a little bit, a couple of areas I wanted to explore a little bit more with you is that shipping is often referred to as a commoditized business. And you mentioned the unique selling proposition, and I think that's a real opportunity for shipping to sort of break out of that mode of being a commodity and really differentiate company to company on why they're different. And would you, how would you approach something like that? How do you say to an industrial company, communicate your value proposition?
Yeah. Well, the ship owner panel that I watched a little bit earlier was talking about more of an industry level communication plan, and I think you talked about it a little bit earlier as well. But I think companies have to look at what they're good at, look at what their strengths are, and then find ways to marry those strengths with what is needed or appreciated or desired by either their customers or the general public. I think you're right. I think the opportunity is huge to differentiate companies in this space, and I think the more that we pay attention to not just the rational, I mentioned this earlier, the rational part of the messaging, that which is important. I don't mean to diminish any of that, but the question is, what do the rational benefits, if you will, translate to in terms of quality of life, appreciation for global trade. I get the product delivered to my door in 24 hours. Whatever the connection is to the end user, can be made with smart messaging, smart marketing, and leveraging the strengths of each company. So I'm not in a position to say this company versus that company ought to be stressing this versus that, but there are going to be some significant differences that can be capitalized upon, and I think part of the messaging has to be beyond just the rational sell. So we often think, again, in industrial product categories, and I've seen this over and over again, you can talk all day about the specs, about the productivity, about the cost benefit, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all important, but the emotional sell, and I don't mean in a gushing kind of way, but in an emotional context, the messages are received much more favorably. So that's the secret sauce that has to be worked out for each company, is what are they good at? How does that marry with what expectations are in the marketplace? And then how do you communicate that effectively to persuade the customer?
Well, absolutely. We're not looking for the Hallmark cards, but
No,
at the same time,
not at all.
the personal approach can be very persuasive.
Correct.
You touched on a conversation that came up earlier in one of the panels. And actually, this is a question that's come to your panel. And so I'm going to address this question directly to you.
Yes.
How can the marine industry improve its messaging to influence society to support its emissions and environmental goals? We are so focused on things we can see, like cars. We don't see the biggest impact as it occurs over the horizon. Hence, marine is a mystery, even though it's very impactful to the environment and very important to society.
Yeah. That's an educational campaign in a nutshell. That is something that has to be explained simply, directly, but in a way that the average, and I'm assuming we're talking about the general public, for example, that the general public can understand in relatively simple and translatable ways, right? So whatever the environmental regulations are that are guiding the industry in the right direction, so that emissions are falling and air quality is improving, and et cetera, those can really be powerful messages to the general public. And I have to believe that the average person on the street, having heard that message, that their impression and overall assessment of the shipping industry, the maritime industry, is going to go up significantly. But in the absence of a message, right? In the absence of a message, what fills the vacuum? Everything else. So I think there's a huge opportunity for maritime generally. I think there's a huge opportunity for individual shipping companies, for each one of them to leverage their strengths. And in many of the support businesses and industries within maritime, there's tremendous opportunity to communicate these kinds of messages and benefits. I'm not trying to make them into ivory soap. I'm trying to say that there are ways to better manage the messaging so that it becomes accessible to the listener on the other side of the discussion.
Well, you also raised the point earlier about how it's increasingly important to listen.
Yes.
And to that end, as you well know, earlier this summer, Surveys and Forecasts fielded a research project for SHIPPINGInsight in order to ascertain the global maritime community's sentiments about having physical versus virtual meetings for both fourth quarter and first quarter, as well as if it were to go virtual, what was most important to that, to the audience, to the potential attendee in terms of what that virtual program would look like.
Right.
And to that end, we used all of that research in designing SHIPPINGInsight 2020. And the importance of gauging the sentiments of the industry is something that I think we need to see more of and more of. And to that end, we created SHIPPINGInsight's Insights, powered by Surveys and Forecasts, so that we can reach into the marketplace, so that we can reach into the community of the global maritime industry in order to assess what's working, what isn't, what are the needs, what are the requirements. Right. And that can be done on that global basis as well as a company by company basis.
Yes. And I think that piece of research in particular, in addition to its guidance of this particular event, that research also demonstrated that people are very anxious to provide feedback. I mean, we got very good response from that piece of research. We got terrific open-ended comments and rich data from that piece of research. And it was very clear what people were looking for. And you will remember that when we did that, people were looking for a well-organized event with great content and opportunity to network. And boom, SHIPPINGInsight. So all that data was very valuable in helping to formulate the format for this particular event. And I think it's been tremendously powerful.
Well, that, and then in the last 2 weeks, we've collaborated again on fielding the research on what the global community thinks on the deep dive issues that we talked about with fleet management optimization
Yeah.
as well as getting into the decades of decarbonization and the decades of disruption. So all of that research is also now available. So thank you very much for that collaboration. And I just want to say that Shipping Insights will be providing more opportunities for that feedback that we so badly need on a global level for our maritime industry, as well as provide opportunities for companies to research this quality of research and surveys that you provide.
My pleasure.
Okay, thank you very much for the surveys and forecasts workshop today. And I think we've all learned a lot, and we've got a real opportunity to identify clearly what the needs are and what can be provided to meet those needs, so that next time Frank Coles won't be complaining so much about having solutions to problems that don't exist.
Well, customer insight is a powerful thing. We ought to all pay attention to it.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Rob Walker, in Surveys and Forecasts.
Thank you, Carlene.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Carlene. Bob, if you're still there, I have one question for you. When you go out with surveys, how many do you anticipate getting back?
That depends on what the size of the initial universe is. I mean, I'd love to tell you that, we get 100% cooperation from every survey that we conduct, but that's not the case. I'll answer it in two ways. One is, if it is a highly concentrated market, let's say it has 30 players, 30 companies, 30 decision makers, whatever it is, and we get 15 of them, that's pretty good. And I would probably look at how we would weight that data when it comes back. So if the 15 of the 30 that come back represent 80% of the market, I'd say home run. If it's a more diffused market, if it's a market of thousands or potentially millions, then budgetary constraints come in and other things come in terms of what we can conceivably do in terms of analysis of that data. But typically, if it's an unlimited sample pool, 100 to 200 respondents would generally suffice for a widely penetrated or high incidence category. It really depends on the most important thing in a piece of research is the quality of your list or the quality of your sample. So if you have a high quality sample and you have good relations with your customers, and you give them advance notice that it's coming, you alert them that it's coming, you send it out, you ask for at least a few reminders or issue a couple of reminders, at least a couple, after the survey goes out. And also, one of the benefits, if it's not something that's being incentivized in some way, that you promise the respondents that you're going to share some of the results with them when the survey is over, when the study is complete. You can do very well. Again, with a scenario like that, if you've got 25 or 30% response rate, that would be very good.
I was lucky to get 10 to 15%. Anyway, thank you very much. Interesting conversation, interesting panel, both of you.